Every year, thousands of students apply to the Ivy League, and only about 5% get in. Do you want to be in that 5%? Then stay tuned. Hi, I'm Nathan Greenberg, founder of Ivy League Mentors, and one of the most common questions that I get from parents and from students is, how can I get into the Ivy League? Or how is my kid going to get into an Ivy League school? Now, sometimes the people asking those questions are already in high school and they're getting ready to apply, but sometimes these questions come from parents whose kids are barely out of diapers. Now, I know that's a little bit ridiculous, but at the same time, it is important to consider that the tallest trees are the ones that have the deepest roots. And if you want to maximize your chance of getting into the Ivy League, it pays to start early. So, I'm bringing you this video, the first in a 3-part series. This video is going to cover what you should be doing between grades K through 9 if you want to boost your chances of getting into an Ivy League school. Now, I should probably begin with a little disclaimer. There's not just one way to get into an Ivy League university. In fact, these highly competitive schools value diversity, and they like to see different kinds of applicants. That said, in my experience, I have seen dozens of students that I've taught get into these schools, and I have noticed some very important trends. So these are general observations about what I think is the easiest way to get into an Ivy League university. It doesn't necessarily mean it's the only path, but it is definitely the path of least resistance. So let's begin. As I mentioned before, the focus on grades K through 9 should be basically developing the deepest roots that you can. And this is important because once you get to grades 10, 11, and 12, you need to demonstrate excellence. But excellence is not something that happens overnight. For instance, if you want to be the captain of your soccer team, you can't do that if you don't start playing soccer until you reach 10th grade. If you want to be the first violinist in your school orchestra, that's not going to happen if you don't pick up a violin until you reach high school. So I'm going to talk about what you can do in 3 key areas: academics, general study skills, and third, extracurricular activities. Now, regarding academics, your key goal should be to get into the best classes possible at your school. Now, this may not always be possible because a lot of schools don't have a lot of options when it comes to younger students. But when there is an option to get into an advanced class, you want to take that. Let me tell you a little bit about my personal experience. I took BC Calculus when I was in 10th grade, which is very early, but the only reason I was able to do that was because I finished my Algebra 2 and Pre-Calc when I was in 9th grade. And the only reason I was able to do that was because I got my geometry out of the way when I was in 8th grade. And I could only do that because I got Algebra 1 out of the way when I was in 7th grade. As you can see, it's important to get on the right track starting as early as possible. So if your school does offer any advanced classes, it's important to get into those classes. Next, and this may be even more important, you want to focus on developing good study skills. All right, now this is also not something that happens overnight. All right, so what do you need to succeed when you get to high school? Well, first of all, I think general language and reading skills are really important. I've noticed that students who read a lot in their free time tend to do much better in high school on the SAT, and they get into better colleges. So even if you don't like reading, I highly encourage you to try to adopt a hobby of some reading. Now, you can find ways to make this a little bit more enjoyable for yourself. For instance, if you're really into sports, well, read about sports. If you're really into fantasy, well, then read fantasy books. You don't have to read really boring books. I should also add that if you are trying to cultivate a habit of reading, being level appropriate is really important. I've seen parents come to me and they're like, "Can you teach my 5th grader The Great Gatsby?" Well, okay, yes, I can do it, but your kid's not going to enjoy this book and they're not really going to understand it. All right, so find books that challenge you a little bit, but at the same time are realistic, are not so difficult that you have to go looking up a word every sentence, because that's going to be miserable and you're never going to get through it. Now, while we're on the topic of language, I also should add, for those of you who are not native English speakers, this is a really good chance to develop your English skills. By the time you reach high school, it's not as easy to learn foreign language. You're probably going to get an accent which might cause you embarrassment later on. So if you really want to be comfortable in English, you need to start early on. One of the best ways to do this is to study abroad in an English-speaking country. If that's not an option, you should try to make sure to take lessons with a native speaker, just so you can develop that comfort early on. Now, I'm also going to add, if you are a native English speaker, this is a great time to learn a foreign language. One of my biggest regrets is that I didn't learn a foreign language when I was young. In fact, I didn't bother to study a foreign language until I got to college, and when I showed up at Brown and I decided to take Introduction to Spanish, that was the hardest course I took in college. So, start early, you will only regret it if you don't when it comes to language. Third, and this message goes out mostly to the parents, in order to thrive in high school, students need to be able to work alone, to be independent and self-directed. So, if you are a helicopter mom, I understand. I'm a parent myself. I definitely want to take a heavy-handed approach in raising my kids sometimes. But that's not going to work out very well in the long run, because if you're always doing their homework for them, they're never going to learn how to do anything themselves, and they're not going to want to do things themselves. So a little bit of independence, a hands-off approach, can sometimes be better in the long run for cultivating independence. Finally, I want to move on to the topic of extracurricular activities. As I mentioned earlier, extracurricular activities are something that can take time to develop. I gave the example of a soccer player. If you want to make varsity soccer in high school, start young. If you want to make the orchestra and be first violin, you need to start young. And so the important thing at a young age is to get broad exposure to a wide range of extracurricular activities. Because the truth is, at this age, you don't always know what's right for you. But trying things can never hurt. In fact, it can be a lot of fun. So at this age, I would encourage you to try as many different kinds of extracurricular activities as possible. See what you like, see what you're good at, and this is something that you can build on later when you get to high school. Now, we're going to cover that in the next video, but let me make one final comment before we stop for the day, and that is about grades. Your grades do not matter before you get to high school, but starting in 9th grade, they do matter. And so it's important that you are getting good grades in all your classes throughout this time. Anyways, that's as far as we're going to take things in this video, but as I mentioned, this is just the first part in a 3-part series. In the next video, we're going to be explaining what you should be doing in grades 10 and 11 to maximize your chances of getting into the Ivy League. Thanks again for watching. If you found this video helpful, please subscribe and also click like. In addition, there are a number of resources about the college application process on our website, Ivy League Mentors Prep. There's a link to that in the description, so please check that out. Thanks.